Hello, and welcome to this Upgrade Your Sound Product Showcase. My name is Ray Richardson with Music and Arts, and I'm excited to spend some time talking about the Strobel and Bellafina line of violins made by Howard Core. I have a special guest joining me today from Howard Core, Hans Anderson. Hans is here to discuss a couple of the key models, share some unique insights into what makes the Strobel and Bellafina models unique, and of course, answer any questions that might come up during the presentation. You can see some Q&A functionality at the bottom of your screen. So at any point during the session, you can post a question and somebody will be able to answer you. The Strobel and Bellafina violins are incredibly popular among students and teachers. We're gonna go dive in depth on three particular models and hear from our expert Hans on why they are a great choice for the advancing string player looking to upgrade to a better instrument. Welcome, Hans. It's great to be here tonight with you. Take it away.
Thank you, Ray. I'm very glad to be here. Hi, everybody. My name is Hans Anderson, and I'm from Howard Core Company. I'm a cellist myself, and for many years I worked at a violin shop. So for me, talking with folks about violins and maybe sharing some things that you might not know, this is going to be a lot of fun. As Ray mentioned, we're going to talk about three different models: the Bellafina ML-30, the Strobel ML-205, and the Strobel ML-605. And these are some of my favorite models. I think once I kind of show you a little bit more, you're going to learn more why. But real quickly, I just want to share a bit of Howard Core Company's background story. Now, Howard Core himself was a cellist and a string educator who started the business in 1976. Over the years, he and his family grew the company by bringing in the very best orchestral string products from Europe. And eventually in the 90s, started importing things from Asia. Now, as a musician and a string educator, his high standards for tone quality and craftsmanship were really the foundations upon which Howard built his customer-focused business. Today, the luthiers in our USA workshop inspect and set up every instrument. And let me explain a little bit about this process because our USA setup for us is really a key feature that delivers easy playability, quick response, and full tonal spectrum. So no matter the instrument, a good setup maximizes the potential to the fullest. So our luthiers perform the following steps on each and every violin, including the Strobel and Bellafina models. We custom fit the bridge. As you can see here, the bridge is curved at the top, but it's also curved to fit the very unique profile of the top. Now, each and every instrument, even from the same model, will have very minute differences because wood is really an organic, natural product. Over time, it swells and it contracts. It's very sensitive to temperature and humidity. So over its lifetime, you kind of have to take care of that and be aware of it. But that's why you can't just do cookie cutter parts. You really have to customize each and every piece to that very specific violin. So the custom fitting the bridge is a key part of that. That transmits the sound from the strings through the bridge to the instrument itself. The other thing we do is we custom fit a sound post. It's a little hard to see on here, but if you look inside a violin, you'll see it looks like a little dowel, a little piece of spruce that connects the top plate with the back plate. And that sound post transmits the vibrations that are coming through the bridge to the top, transmits those directly to the back plate. And again, if we look at the violin, we see all these different curves. We see the curves on the back. So the sound post on the inside also has to fit the very precise curves that are specific to that instrument. The fitting of the pegs is another important functional part of the installation process. So these are pegs that have a taper to them, and that taper has to be exactly fit to match the profile of the peg box. And so again, that's one of the things that maybe you don't look at it and see a big difference, but when you're tuning, okay, so the better fit that peg is, the easier it is to tune it, and then it will stay in the position that it's supposed to. So that's a very functionally important part of that setup procedure. Another thing that we do is we plane the fingerboard. So the fingerboard looks pretty flat. And if you look down it looks pretty flat, but it's not exactly flat. We actually intentionally carve in a little bit of what we call a scoop. And so that little bit of concave shape is necessary to allow the string to vibrate. If it were perfectly flat and you were to position your fingers at certain spots, you'd get a buzzing sound because where your finger meets the fingerboard, there needs to be more room for that vibration. So that slight curvature is very important. Too much of it will mean that the string height in the middle is too great and too difficult for especially a student player to handle. So again, it's one of those fine balances between you need enough scoop so it doesn't buzz, but not so much that it's hard to play. And then we install the strings and do a test play before we send out each and every instrument.
So Hans, this is all of your strings.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And our goal is basically to provide our customers with instruments that basically you receive it, all you have to do is tune it up and it should be ready to play. That the height of the, I talked about the curvature of the bridge at the top, that will define the height of the strings as it goes over the fingerboard. So again, that's one of those things where, the specifications that we follow are in millimeters and oftentimes in tenths of a millimeter. So for example, the string height on the E string is about, 3.5 millimeters, on the G string, maybe about 4.8 to 5.0 millimeters. So again, the tolerances are very tiny. I would say a professional can immediately tell if something's off. A student may not be able to tell, but if it's not set up well, they'll get frustrated. So I guess in a way they'll be aware of it. Again, our goal is to make it so that, especially a younger student that's learning the technique, learning new repertoire, they can really focus on the music itself and not worry about the functionality of a violin. Our goal is that it's just ready to play.
Hans, is there a difference? So if I'm a parent and I have a student who's learning, and they're progressing, is there a difference in some of what you were talking about with those tolerance levels or some of those specifics with regards to the setup that are different on a student instrument versus a step-up instrument that we're going to be talking about tonight, and why is it that way? Like in terms of
That's a good question. There are differences. There are slight differences. I would say probably the most obvious one to me is the strings that are used will impact the type of height that we do on the bridge. So for example, a lot of beginner instruments, a lot of student instruments are going to use a steel string. Why is that? Well, steel strings are very quick. They're very responsive, and the center of the pitch is very clearly defined. So the quality of sound is not so exciting. It's not great, but what the student needs to hear and have response to is a very clearly defined pitch, and then they can move their finger up or down to be in tune. And that's where a steel string is very important. Steel strings don't move as much, so you can do a little bit lower string height and get away with it, and it's comfortable and it's fine. As you get up to higher quality instruments, you're using higher quality strings that have multiple synthetic windings and core materials. And those strings need more room to vibrate, and you will set up the instrument with a bridge that's just a little bit higher. Again, we're talking about tenths of a millimeter, but that's one example of the difference of, the difference between a student instrument and the setup of a higher level instrument.
That's very helpful. Yeah. Interesting. I did not know that.
Well, let's take a look at the Strobel ML-605 in greater detail.
Great.
And I'll start with this one because from my point of view, this is going to have everything that I would say 95% of customers are looking for. If you're walking into a violin shop and you're looking for a violin, I would say this is going to have it. Now, if you're a professional, you've been playing for 20 years, you will definitely appreciate what this can do. You may want something at a higher price point, some old 100 to 200-year-old, Italian instrument or French instrument. But, for most folks, I would say this is going to do everything that you want. It's got brilliance, it's got clarity, it's got power, but it also has warmth and richness. And that's very important whether you're using it for a solo instrument, if you're playing in a quartet or an orchestra. It really has a very full range of tone and dynamics. And so we're using very well seasoned tone woods, typically aged at least 5 years. So that means when the wood is cut from the tree, it's cut into smaller pieces and then aged for a minimum of 5 years. What that allows the wood to do is really to stabilize. If you use wood that's not aged properly, once you make it, the wood is still kind of settling and it will move in unpredictable ways. So for a fine instrument like this, you really want something that's very well seasoned. And we're using a fine grained spruce top. The back is maple, and you'll see it's got this beautiful, we call it flame, or some people call it tiger stripes, but it's really a signifier of a higher quality of wood, tone wood. That same wood is also used on the sides and then also on the neck and the scroll. So these are hand carved to very specific thicknesses, and it really depends on what spot of the instrument we're looking at. Here in the center, if you think about the strings, tuning them up, there's actually probably 14 or 15 pounds of force pushing down right here. So that wood here has to be a little bit thicker. It's typically somewhere in the 4 to 5 millimeter range thickness. But then as you get towards the edges, you want it to be a little bit thinner because you want that plate to be able to move. Again, I'm going to go back to kind of the curves. That's one of the fascinating parts to me about the violin is we're talking about technology that's really 400 years old, but it was so well done by people like Antonio Stradivari. Somehow, I think he was probably contemporary or shortly thereafter of somebody like Da Vinci. And there's just something about that golden period of architecture. And to me, that translates to the violin as such a beautifully designed instrument that the pinnacle of it was really in the 1700s. So now for the past 400 years, everybody's been trying to basically copy that. And so I say that to say these curves are very important, and they require a lot of experience. Okay. Usually a very fine maker has trained at a violin making school for 3 to 4 years and then apprenticed with a master violin maker for another 4 to 8 years. And then finally after that, they can probably, go out on their own and do their thing. But that's another 10 or 20 years before they're considered a master maker. So there's so much time and experience that goes into making with each and every piece of wood. Each and every piece of wood is different. And so I would say the experience of a really fine maker means that they can pick up whatever piece of spruce or maple and they'll flex it and they'll start carving it, and they know in their mind, okay, I want this spot maybe to be maybe 3.5 millimeters, but when they get there or right before, they say, well, the way it's flexing, I'm going to leave it a little thicker, or I can take it down a little bit more. And so that's something that you can't really find that in a manual or a textbook. You have to have that experience, and that's where at this level you're getting craftsmen. These are handmade, so these are made by our workshop. That I would say probably for each instrument there's 3 or 4 people, one person really focusing on the top, another person focusing on the back, somebody else on the side, somebody else on the neck. But these people are so good at understanding what each piece of tone wood can deliver. Their expertise is really maximizing what that specific piece of wood can do. So I don't want to get too bogged down there, but
no, I think it's fascinating.
The great, it's not just a craft. It's not just a science. It's really an art. And you know, the more experience, the better sounding violin you get. Um, and that's, I guess, another key component then is the finish, the varnish that's used. And so this is for the Strobel ML-605. It's a spirit-based varnish. So what do I mean when I say spirit-based? I mean, it's an alcohol-based varnish. There's two types really for higher quality violins. There's oil-based or alcohol-based. Some people have a preference for aesthetics or sound. They're both made by the best makers in the world. The award-winning makers have used both oil-based and alcohol or spirit-based finishes. And then what we do is give it a very subtle, it may be a little hard to tell on the picture, but it's not perfectly monochrome. There's slight antiquing to it. There's probably about 20 different layers of the varnish. So there's a ground coat, and then there's layer after layer of color. Some of the colors will alternate from a lighter golden amber color to a dark brown. And so with this model, we're really trying to achieve something that has a very classic appearance. If you're looking at it from the audience, looking at somebody playing on a stage, you know, if you said, well, it's a 200-year-old violin, I think I'd believe it. I mean, it's got a very nice classic look to it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful instrument.
Yeah. Another other key components then would be the fingerboard. So that we talked about the fingerboard, real ebony. Real ebony is very important. It's such a dense, hard wood that, you know, if you're practicing, let's say 30 minutes a day or an hour a day, or professionals or conservatory students that are practicing, you know, 3, 4, 5 hours a day, you're doing a lot of wear and tear on the fingerboard. So the metal of the string is basically rubbing against the fingerboard over time. If it were a softer wood, you'd have to get that resurfaced, you know, every other week. As it is with an ebony fingerboard, probably once a year for a professional, they'll get that resurfaced to make it nice and smooth and have that slight curve to it. But having real ebony is very important. The pegs are boxwood, so it's a lighter wood, matches with the tailpiece and the chin rest. The boxwood is more for aesthetics. We just think it's got a classic look to it. And then the strings used are the Eva Perazzi. They're made by Perastro, and it's one of the top professional strings, you know, played in every major orchestra, every major music conservatory. I would say it really allows the instrument to sparkle and have a lot of pop and punch. So that's important. I talked about the bridge before.
Yep.
The bridge itself is made by a company called Despiu. It's a French company, and basically there are two leading bridge making companies in the world. They make the blanks, I should say. They make the blanks that we then custom carve to each instrument. But they're you know, sourced from European forests, and the spew, they really do a great job with the wood selection. Again, the maple, it's a very specific type of maple, and it has to also be aged usually for 2 or 3 years before they can, you know, cut it down for blanks. So the strings, the bridge, you know, big impact on tone. And then I'll also show you the bow that it comes with, which is
great.
a so this is a bow by Dorfler. It's stamped Dorfler. Dorfler is a German family of bow makers. I think they're in their 3rd or 4th generation, but they hand make these bows. This is made out of Pernambuco wood, which is another tropical hardwood that has very, very particular characteristics. It's been used historically for 300 years is kind of the wood of choice for bows. So
why is that?
Go ahead.
Why is that? What are those characteristics that make that so the preferred choice?
I'll set the case down. But real quickly, this is the case that it comes with, which is our CC 525 model. You'll see 4 bow holders. It's got a hygrometer and thermometer there, electronic. It's got suspension cushioning, accessory pockets. So, you know, pretty much a professional type case very solid wood shell, so it's built to last for years and years. As far as the Pernambuco wood, and this is an interesting part of the history. The French are known for bridge making. They're also known for bows. So what happened was in the 1700s, France was probably the leading textile manufacturer in the world. So they imported different woods that they used strictly to extract the dye. So Pernambuco is a wood that was imported into France by the tons, by the shiploads, strictly for the dye. The bow makers basically found the wood, saw that the grains were very long and very straight. And so the very best Pernambuco bows, the grains that are starting here at the frog, continue perfectly straight all the way to the tip. And that's why if you talk to a professional or talk to your teacher, they'll talk about being able to basically take a very well-made bow and draw in a very soft tone, a piano or pianissimo. And with their technique and bow control, they can feel if a lesser bow made of lesser wood has a wiggle in the grain. They can actually feel that. And so if other woods have been used, but Pernambuco seems to be that magical species that just works for bows. Anyway, the reason it was used for textiles, it has a purplish color, and that's what they used for.
Gotcha.
That's why they imported it, for that purple color. If you look at a raw Pernambuco, it's got kind of an orangey, purplish color. And then most bow makers will stain it to give it kind of a nice golden brown look. But the fact that the Dorfler family of Germany has been making bows for, 100 years. Again, the tradition of violin making, bow making, I love history. So for me to be able to get to know people that can talk about their, parents or grandparents or the people they apprenticed with, and that history, it's really a neat connection. It's one of those to me, one of the last crafts that is just so personal and so kind of relatively small scale, so that's the Strobel ML-605.
So real quick on the 605s, because you've talked great overview. I mean, I love hearing about the wood and the history and the detail, whether it's the ebony fingerboard, the bridge, all the different components and the thought that's gone into that beautiful instrument. So I want to go back to the wood piece. So
yeah,
it's interesting because I'm not a violin player, but I do understand, have had to deal with other instruments made with wood and string that we all know, if they're not seasoned well, what happens. But in the case of the seasoning of the wood, is there anything besides age that's done to get it ready in preparation? Out of curiosity, is it just making sure that it's kind of,
it's a great question. And it's one that's probably been asked by so many different violin makers, and of course everybody wants a shortcut. I guess that's to me, another interesting thing is certain things you can't do a shortcut. I mean, people have used different what is it called? I think there's ozone or something you can use to try to age the wood, kiln drying like you would pottery. People have tried that. That just basically deteriorates it. There's a certain, I'm not a chemist, but there's a certain molecular process that happens with the wood over time. I've heard people talk about it it's like a polymerization. And so the longer that wood just naturally ages, the cellular structure changes, and you can't, there's not a shortcut for that, at least with the technology we have now. Who knows in the future, but there's really not much you can do but just wait.
Gotcha.
And typically, just air dried. I know a lot of makers will actually dry it kind of in a very open, not like an outhouse, meaning it's a outdoor structure with protection for rain and snow and things like that. But they'll actually have ventilation going through it, which helps to further season it and allow it to go through colder seasons and warmer seasons. Somehow there's some magic that just happens over time. So
Gotcha.
that's the short answer.
No,
There's not.
I appreciate it. So you were talking about, when we started talking about, I think you're talking about Howard Core's instruments in general. You talked about playability and response, full tonal spectrum. But then when you were talking about the 605, you talked about brilliance,
Yeah.
power, full range of tone. That told me a little bit about the instrument. I do want to kind of tease out as a parent of a string player, kind of those words I'm not used to hearing, and I can't. I mean, I'm used to hearing them, but not in that way to understand what that truly means. So I'm curious to hear more about that. But I'm also really curious to hear about the type of player, because you were saying,
Yeah.
you were talking about all the different types of musics and the different types of groups that it can be used in. But what kind of player? I'd start with that question first before I go to the other one. But what kind of player is the person that should be looking at the 605?
Yeah, to me, I think of the typical customer for the ML-605. I would think of as like a high school student that is taking private lessons. They're participating in solo and ensemble and other competitions, and they like to practice. You don't have to tell them to practice. They'll do it on their own. Okay. They may or may not be looking to a career in music, whether as a performer, educator. No matter what, they just love it. And whether they're a student or younger student, or what I call a lifelong enthusiast, or somebody older like me who's maybe has a different kind of profession and they're just an amateur player, but they love it. They play at home just for fun. They play at church. They play it with a local community orchestra. To me, this violin, I've seen it with customers. It basically does everything that they want. And when I use words like brilliance or warmth, whether you're talking about coffee or wine, I mean, there's all, it's hard to describe things that, it's really how it sounds. But some instruments have a darker sound, warmer, smoother, softer. I think to me, the best instruments kind of have the capability to do anything. So it should be the music that dictates whether it's what's on the printed page, the sheet music, or whether if you're improvising, what do you hear? What do you feel? To me, it should be the music that dictates whether you want that brilliant sound or that darker sound. And that's why, to me, this instrument, has that range. You can pretty much do anything with that.
No, that's great. So I don't mean to put you on the spot, Hans, but when you talk about the brilliance and the power and the full range, would you mind maybe playing a little something to demonstrate?
Sure, yeah. So I said it before, I'm a cellist. Violin is not my first instrument. So that's my caveat. But and through Zoom technology, I don't know how good the speakers are, but the mics are, but I'll play a little something. I'm just playing kind of a medium mezzo forte, not too loud, not too soft. I'm not using a lot of bow pressure. Again, I'm a cellist, so I have a tendency to use a lot of bow pressure for cello. But to me, I guess what I hear is that it just, with minimal effort, it's just kind of alive. There's stuff happening. And that's the magical thing about the expertise of the craftsman that can carve that thick piece of wood and bring it down to 2 millimeters or 3 millimeters or four. All those specific decisions that they make have an impact on how alive that sound is. So we're starting here with the 605. We're going to go to the 205 and then the ML30 next, which don't have the same level of tone wood, so same level of craftsmanship. Still wonderful instruments, but to me, this has that quality that I wish I was a better violinist. I could really show this violin off, but I would encourage people to go to your local music and art store and check one out. That there's no substitute for that.
I mean, it sounded great. I could hear. I mean, I felt like it was still, your bow was over here, and it was like still resonating. So
yeah, that's one thing. Pretty much any whether you're a parent or a student or and I'll play the 205. I don't know if you can hear it, but what I hear is, okay, it's there's a glow to it. It's just not as big. And that's where I guess the way I'm thinking about the sound in a space is, and another reason why the 605 does better for people doing more solo performance competitions, it fills the space. Whereas maybe the 205, it fills a smaller type of space, and you hear beautiful things. It's just not as big.
Understood.
So that's where, whether you've got a budgetary constraint, or to be honest, there's some players that this is too much of a violin. There's too much going on. It's like I guess the difference between a nice luxury car and a high performance racing vehicle, Indy cars or NASCAR. Some people just want to go fast, and this goes fast. Okay? You can do anything and everything. If you're that kind of player that just wants to do anything. Other players, they don't need that. They don't want that. They just want something that, the 205 to me is really, I'll get into more details, but just, kind of comparing apples to apples. So a lot of folks, I would recommend when you're testing violins to play very short passages. If you play too long a passage, you're thinking about the music, and I just want to listen to the violin. So again, under my ear, I'm hearing there's more depth, there's more richness with the 605. The 205 is great. And if I'm not as concerned with power and not concerned with kind of a bigger, broader range of dynamics, then this really is a lovely, pleasant sound. And that's, again, whether it's a budgetary constraint or just you want something a little softer, a little sweeter, this 205 is a great choice. So let me go into that a little bit more.
Absolutely, please.
So this is handcrafted from also very well-aged tone woods. Typically at this level about 3 to 4 years aging of the tone wood. For this model, we actually decided to use a European spruce top. The European spruce, and just so everybody knows, the ML-605, that uses old growth Chinese tone woods, which a lot of makers feel are very comparable to what you'd find with European tone woods, but still there are some people that have an idea of what a European spruce can do. I would say, well, it's a fact that it has European spruce. I would say in a blind test, most people aren't going to be able to tell the difference because there are other factors going into the sound. But what it does help consistently is that it gives it a bit more focus for this model. We've tested it with the Chinese spruce, but this European spruce really just seems to give it more focus. So I don't want to dwell too much on that because it's just one factor of many. It's still using really well flamed maple on the back, and same maple on the sides and the scroll in the neck. Fingerboard's also going to be real ebony. Same type of effort goes into shaping it. The finish is also a spirit-based finish. We do an antique look. So here you'll see a little bit more contrast between this middle area is a little bit darker, warm brown color. This is a little bit lighter color. That kind of mimics what we call antiquing. An older instrument over time just gets worn down with contact with shoulder. This area it wears down the color and spots where it touches inside the case. Usually where the hand comes into contact, there's wear, so that typically is made a little bit lighter color. Gotcha. Again, it's just a nice aesthetic finish to kind of complement the hard work that goes into the carving process.
But Hans, all of the models today, they're the spirit-based finish, correct?
Actually, the Bellafina is actually an oil-based finish. Again, it's not that oil is necessarily always. Some makers have a point of view about that, but I've talked to award-winning gold medal winning makers that use a spirit-based finish. So it's really kind of the preference of the maker and gotcha. what aesthetic they're going for. The important thing about a properly applied finish is it's got to be durable, but it has to be elastic. And if I haven't used this word before, to me, elastic is one of the most important concepts for violin. So, you carve these pieces of spruce and maple, and you've got them in there's a fixed thickness, and it's a fixed shape. But if you have like a high-speed camera and you recorded and slowed it down, very slow motion, you would see the top plates moving. You'd see the back plates moving. The goal is to make the instrument flexible enough and elastic enough that it can vibrate and resonate, because it's that vibration and that resonance that leads to kind of more interesting tonal qualities. And that's a big difference, between a 1/10 of a millimeter more wood on this, because the makers don't have the time or the expertise. And what I mean when they don't have the time, if you give anybody enough time, they can make an amazing instrument. It's going to cost $10,000, $20,000. So to allow enough time to make an instrument within a certain price point, you have to make some choices. So to get this at this price point, we can't spend as much time in that carving process. That's why the plates are a little bit thicker. That's why the makers working on this model aren't the master makers, but they're the people that are eventually going to be master makers. So everything about it is not quite as optimal as it could be, but again, we're trying to do something with a budgetary constraint.
Right.
But again, that elasticity, it's important for the wood. It's also important for the varnish. A big difference between these and a basic rental student instrument is those student instruments are going to be a lot thicker, a lot heavier. And those instruments typically are going to use some kind of like a polyurethane type finish, which is very durable, very strong, which is what you want. If you're a school program and you've got these instruments that you want to last for not just this year, but for next year, and for you need something very durable. The thicker the instrument, the thicker the varnish, then the longer it's going to last. Okay, but sound wise, you're not getting the quality that you could with something like this. So again, that spirit-based finish is very important, not just the looks of it, but in terms of functioning and letting the wood to really flex and vibrate. Quickly then to go on to tailpiece, the fittings here we're using are a ebony. It's got a Parisian eye, so if maybe it's a little hard to see, but there's a little pearl eye there with a ring around it. More of a decorative feature, but a classic feature. This is something that's to me signifies the the history of violins. But for the tailpiece, we decided to use a tailpiece, a composite tailpiece with an integrated fine tuner. This model is kind of at that crossover point between a student instrument, somebody who's been playing for a couple of years. They really like playing and they want something better, but they're still used to, as with their student instrument, using the fine tuners right here to tune. That's an option. And then as they continue to progress, they'll use the pegs more often because that's what professionals do. Why do they do that? The pegs actually are a better way to tune for higher quality strings. I talked before about the difference between a basic steel string and then something with a more advanced either gut core or synthetic core with multiple windings going in different directions. These are the things that give professional strings a lot of zing and zip and special sauce, so to speak. But because there are all those layers, if you use the fine tuner to tune that, the movements are so small that and I'm sorry, I'm kind of fumbling through this, but it's hard to describe. The layers of the string, you have to move kind of the whole string, and the movement with the peg is a much bigger movement of the string. It's pulling the whole thing. When you're using the fine tuner, it's such a small movement that you have the chance that you're pulling one layer of the string, but not the other layer. So that's the long way of saying using fine tuners with professional level strings, you shorten the lifespan of the string. So you get a longer playability with when you use the pegs. So sorry, that took so long to explain.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense.
And here we're using a Perastro tonica. So Perastro is the German company that makes the Eva Prazzi strings that we use on the ML-605. They also make a level down called the tonica. It also has a synthetic core. It's got multiple layers. It's not quite the high-tech material and winding process that you have for the Eva Prazzi, but again, it fits a really great price point. So it's a very affordable string and has great tonal qualities. Basically, they used the research and development and developing. They introduced this string about 20 years ago, but it's still one of the top level strings. But they kind of use that technology to create something that's at a lower price point, still plays great. Again, people can start using the fine tuners here, but eventually we always recommend to use the pegs for this level of string. And then let me quickly show you the bow that is used for the ML-205. So it comes with this very nice oblong shaped case. And sorry, it's a kind of a dark blue color. Maybe it's hard to see, but it's got also suspension cushioning. It's got the accessories pocket, another accessory compartment here. It has a hygrometer. The other case, the higher level case, has an electronic hygrometer and temperature gauge. This has a analog dial. But I'll just quickly say something about that, because especially now here in December, I know in many parts of the country, it's quite cold and quite dry.
Right.
And I mentioned before how sensitive instruments are to changes in humidity and temperature. You ideally want to keep about 30 to 50% humidity. So people that own a piano and know how temperamental pianos can be, that humidity is also very important for violins and violas, cellos, basses. The wood is so, again, carved so thin that if it gets too dry, it could crack. And so that's something, could somebody make an indestructible violin? Sure. It just wouldn't sound very good.
Right.
I mean, they're actually carbon fiber instruments that are, the technology has certainly come a long way. but there's no substitute for a well-made wooden violin. And again, with that comes the responsibility of the owner to take care of it. And that's another thing about the history. I mean, any one of these violins, I would say, if you take care of regular maintenance, make sure to have a proper humidification system. The music and art stores have a great options for several different types of humidifier products. Some will fit inside the instrument temporarily. Others will be a system that is housed in the case, and so that when the instrument is in the case, it's humidified. But I always encourage people, especially in the northern, very dry, very cold climates, that it's worth investing in a humidifier for the room, the music room, wherever that instrument is kept, because as soon as you take it out, even if it's perfectly humidified with a little dampen on the inside or the case humidifier, you take it into a dry room, that moisture is gone. So if you can keep that instrument as stable as possible, that's, the violin will last for 100 years, 200 years. This is the neat thing about it. And it will they'll only sound better over time. That's the other fun part. I should say that, you should only go with an instrument that you love now. But to me, the exciting part is knowing that over time, the more you play it, it really blossoms. I mean, there's just like, the aging of the tone wood is important, and there's no substitute for just letting it age. There's no substitute for playing. Once you have the instrument, the more you plan it, the more it really opens up. And so it just gets better over time. I can't think of too many other products in today's world
Right, that's very true.
that last that long and have so much, create so much joy. So, sorry, to go to the bow, back to the bow, that the ML-205 comes with our carbon composite bow. So Pernambuco is an expensive wood. It's probably one of the more expensive woods out there. And it's a tropical hardwood. So it's most often grown in Brazil. And I would say for the past 20, 30 years, there's been a consortium of bow makers that have really placed responsible harvesting as a key part of their mission. And so they're very, now it's very sustainable, but there was a time where Pernambuco was just becoming more and more rare. And so probably 30 or 40 years ago, people started experimenting with fiberglass, with carbon materials. This is a carbon composite. And so the great thing is, from a player's point of view, again, if you're blindfolded, I don't think you could tell that this is made of synthetic material. It's designed to have the same weight range. So violin bows typically are around 60 grams. And so same weight range, same balance point, which is about right here. And so functionally, it does everything that a good wood bow can do. It just, it allows the good Pernambuco to be used for really fine bows. And for other bows that have to be at a lower price point, a carbon composite material is great. The other thing is, if I accidentally dropped it, it's not going to break.
Right.
And that's why for student instruments, we use fiberglass bows. I own a carbon fiber. I have a beautiful wood bow, but I also have a carbon fiber bow that I use if I'm playing an outdoor wedding or some other kind of gig where I'm worried about, the wood bow is so fragile, accidents happen. So most professionals will use a carbon fiber, carbon composite bow as a backup bow because it's virtually indestructible. So that's a nice component to that. So I'm just looking over my notes to see if I missed anything with the ML-205. Ray, did you have any questions about this?
I think we're good on the 205. That's a beautiful instrument.
Yeah.
You articulated who would be playing that. It was very helpful. It's basically someone who's been playing for a while. They're not ready for the 605, but there's some characteristics that are a nod to their student instrument that they're used to, but it's getting them ready as they step to the next level. you know, like you said, some of those details you talked about, whether it's the finish, some of the other, you know, the wood makeup, the way it's carved, it's definitely going to sound a lot better than that student instrument. But it's a great step up as they progress on their musical journey. Not quite the 605, but still a solid instrument. That's kind of what I heard from you. Is that did I do a good job?
Yeah, well said. That's kind of exactly the way I look at it. If you were to take your student rental instrument and pick this up, you'd have a big wow moment. I mean, it's really astonishing how good this sounds. It's harder to come on after this one because it's a little bit of a letdown, but still, you know, for the right situation, for the right kind of sound, I think it just delivers such a great value. You know, I'd love to play something like this myself if I started to take up the violin. So this is the ML-205, really great choice for a lot of folks. I will go on next to the the Bellafina.
Please.
So we're gonna end up with the Bellafina ML-30. This is the Domenico series violin outfit. And to me, this is fun because this is actually a European-made violin. It's made in Romania. And I would say German instruments, a little higher price point, but Romanian, I would say for 30 or 40 years, they've really been able to produce instruments that at a very relatively low price point that deliver a lot of great features. This has a very warm, smooth tone. Again, I think it's great for a student player that's been, you know, playing for a year and kind of grown out of their scratchy sounding violin. Again, we talked about steel strings, very clear pitch, but not very interesting sounding, not very pleasant sounding necessarily. So when you get to the point where you want that more wider range of tonal response, I'll just quickly play a real quick passage. So right away, when I play the G string, I get this really rich, deep sound. It's not quite, there's not quite as much sparkle, doesn't fill the room as much as the other two models, but really it does fill the room to an extent, and it's got a really beautiful, rich sound. Very smooth, very warm. There are some players that just, you know, like I talked about before, sometimes that kind of violin is just too much, and they want something that they, you know, they can, maybe they're just playing with at home, you know, with friends, playing at church. They're not playing solos necessarily. They're trying to blend with others. And so this is a very good blending instrument. The top is made of, so in Romania, they've got the Carpathian Mountains, and this maker, they basically have their own section of the forest that they harvest their woods, their tone woods from. So it's got this beautiful European spruce top, European maple. You'll see the finish is maybe a little bit more opaque, so it's harder to catch the grain, but it's still, there's flame in the maple, which you'll see on the sides and in the back, in the scroll and the neck. And if you held this and compared it, again, this ML-605 and the two of that, these are lighter. This is a little heavier, but again, with the time allowed for construction for this instrument, it's got to be a little bit heavier build. Gotcha. Again, it gives it a, from these particular makers, it gives it a little bit warmer, deeper sound though. And that's, I would say, just a characteristic of this particular maker. But to me, that's why I think it's done so well. You know, I've talked to a lot of customers that are very happy with this kind of sound because it is that warmer, richer sound. This is actually an oil-based varnish. So it's kind of that matte finish. It's not as shiny or glossy, um, but it's nice and durable. And still using real ebony for the fingerboard. Again, that's such an important part for, I'll, I'll just say this, anything that Howard Core produces, we use real ebony for the fingerboards. It's just, that's how important it is. Uh, Real ebony pegs. Uh, This uses a bridge by Albert, which is the other French bridge making company. I talked about two of them. So there's Vespu, and there's Albert. They're both fantastic, but this one uses an Albert bridge. The strings are Diodario Zyx. This also helps to give it a warm, smooth response. And again, we're doing the composite tailpiece with the fine tuners there. This has a real ebony Guarneri style chin rest. And yeah, I mean, this has been very popular. It's a budget friendly instrument, so to speak. And it, you know, compared to other instruments in a similar price range, which typically are kind of brighter and harsher, this has just a nice warm smoothness that to me is, I'm a cellist, but I find a lot of customers actually like that warmer, smoother sound at this level of instrument. So the bow that comes with it is a Brazilwood bow. So now we've looked at 3 different bows with 3 different materials. So we looked at Pernambuco, that's the highest level. Then kind of the carbon, whether it's carbon composites or some carbon fiber, that's kind of the middle level. Brazilwood is another type of tropical hardwood that's it's less expensive, quite frankly. So we're able to use it for kind of lower grade bows, but it's still, compared to a fiberglass bow, which is what's used for rental instruments, or beginning instruments, I should say, compared to that, there's something about real wood that seems to have more, so it's not just the violin that's creating the sound. If you ask your violin teacher or talk to a professional, they'll talk about auditioning bows and trying. Maybe they've got their violin they've had for 5 years. Professional violin maybe cost them $15,000. I've seen people. I've had friends of mine that have spent 6 months auditioning bows because the subtle differences and nuances between certain bows. Again, the wood itself is helping to produce tone. And so I say all that to say there's still something about Brazilwood at this level. It seems to be a good match for this particular violin. It helps to give it, again, that warmth and richness. So the Brazilwood bow is a great alternative to Pernambuco at a lower price point.
Gotcha. And the player, I mean, it seems like the ML-30 actually, I keep asking questions as a parent, right?
Yeah.
About the different player, our Upgrade Your Sound events are about the progressing student who's outgrowing their student level instrument, getting into a step up. But these instruments you've shown today, like at least the last 2, I ask questions about, what kind of player, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm hearing some of it's a broad range of player. They're obviously an advancing player, but some of it's just personal preference and kind of what they're expecting out of the instrument.
A lot of it is personal preference. And that's, I mean, I'm sure there are technical numbers I could give you, but they just wouldn't mean that much. It's not like an iPhone or a computer. There's something very subjective about sound, about music, style of music, the approach. It's so personal. And again, that's why I love what we're doing here, is because as a player, you have a choice. My wife, she studied opera in college, so she's a singer, fantastic singer. But she would tease me that, like, as a string player, I could choose my instrument. I could choose. As a vocalist, you have what you have, and that's it. So to me, we have this wonderful opportunity to choose our voice, so to speak. We can. If this kind of warm, smooth tone really speaks to me, go for it. Maybe I'm not concerned about playing for the whole world to hear. If I am, and I'm got that bold, that bold performance characteristic. You know, I've got 3 kids, and one of them is pretty shy and reserved, and another one is a little more out there. So much of it is personality. It's some of it, you know, personal choice, and again, music is it's such a personal endeavor that yeah, that is a fun part about this, is that you really get to pick the sound that speaks to you.
Oh, it's great. You know, Hans, you've spent a ton of time this evening, and I really appreciate it. This is, you know, this is fun because I get to ask the questions this time. I've obviously attended a few of these, trying to learn myself a little bit about the various instruments, but you know, I didn't know if there's any last before we close here, any last things you want to say about the ML30 or any of these 3 great instruments? Because I know we picked these 3 for a reason. These are the ones that have, you know, whether it's educators or students that have proven to be the best instruments as they progress on their musical journey. So I wonder, why we have everyone, before we sign off, if there's anything you want to leave us with.
Well, again, Ray, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and share this information with your audience. It's a pleasure for me and a lot of fun. Yeah, I've tried to kind of cover the basics. You know, that there's the ML30 that really does a lot of things well for at a certain price point. And then if your budget allows you and you want that kind of bigger sound, you can go to the Strobel 205. And then if you really want a big soloistic kind of instrument, that's where the Strobel 605. So we try to have something for every budget, for every kind of player. And to me, the most important thing is to go into your local music and art store and try them out. I can't do this justice over the video. I'm trying to explain, but you know, there's no substitute for picking it up, playing it, you know, seeing how it speaks to you. And to me, that's the real takeaway, is I would just encourage folks to try these out for themselves.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. So everyone, I'd like to thank Hans for joining us this evening for the product showcase about the Strobel and Bellafina lineup of strings. I think everybody will agree that these instruments are among the top violins in the market today, and an excellent choice for many levels of players, as Hans was just reminding us at the end there. During the Upgrade Your Sound showcase, we have several special offers available, including 50% off $199 or more, or online. You can use code UIS15. And we also have 0% interest for 48 months. For financing, we have 2 options: come into a music and art store, or if you'd like to do it online, you can work with our online partner, Woodwind and Brasswind, at woodwindbrasswind.com, and you can sign up for financing there online. All of these offers will be running through the end of the month of December. So if you have any more questions, the showcase extends in stores this weekend, where you can visit your local music and art store to speak with an instrument expert and learn about lessons and learn more about repair, learn more about these beautiful Strobel and Bellafina instruments. Thank you again for joining this instrument showcase about the Strobel and Bellafina line of strings made by the Howard Core Company. Thank you for joining us. Take care.